start by asking where the germ of the idea is. It's such an interesting script and an interesting story and very much an interesting character. So I was hoping you could talk about where the idea for the film came from and also the work that the two of you did to build this character.
Yeah, I mean, I read a spec script by Brian and Elliot, and it just really stuck with me. I mean, the question of what's behind a tabloid story, which is really just people who've lost dignity and been reduced to a joke, and the question is, how do you restore that dignity to these characters? And because failure is human, and we all recover in some way.
You allude a little bit to the tabloid story, but I was hoping you could tell us how it's loosely based on a tabloid story and the work that you, and Natalie can respond to this too, but it's the work that you guys did together to create this real character that you see.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough story. I did not want to make a movie about a woman who falls apart because she's too emotional about a man, right? That's not what this movie is. This is a movie about an existential crisis and a woman who's having an existential crisis, and the affair is a symptom of that, but it's not what the story is. And you know, we had conversations. We had the fear of fatal attraction conversations, and the calibration of it, both in the writing and obviously the performance, and then editing. You know, it was a really intensive process, I felt like.
Absolutely, and having that kind of guidance about this existential crisis was such an interesting entry point to her, because I remember seeing in a documentary that there was an astronaut that said that if from space they put their thumb out, they could completely cover the Earth. And the perspective that gives you, that experience gives you, is so transformative, and then you expect people to come back and just have their own lives. It's actually the most human thing to have this kind of reaction. It's actually much more hard to understand how you can then go and just go about your daily life after you've had this kind of wonder and transcendence.
And kind of on that note, the film in that way is so predicated on the idea of people that have gone through an experience together or a similar experience and feel a bond ostensibly that other people don't understand. And when I see you guys together, I see you working so well together, and I see the team in the film working so well together until it starts to fray. And I'm wondering how much time you spent together rehearsing, on set, off set.
14 years. It started in 2005, I guess. Before
I was 5 years old when it started.
You were very young. It was almost inappropriate, honestly. No, I mean, that's what you described is kind of the experience that most people making a movie go through, or a television show for an extended period of time. You have this shared experience that then becomes unique to you, and unique to the project. We've all worked on various other things, but this is unique to its own experience. And that was, I think it was able, at least for me, I was able to take some of that and use it for the story we were trying to tell, and what Noah was trying to highlight, was that you've gone through this particular thing that very few people can relate to. How do you relate that? How do you process that? What is that like? And what becomes of that if you find you don't have an outlet for that? And I think that's what Natalie's done so well in showing this, and what's done so well in bringing it to light, is that it's difficult and it can be devastating.
Were there things that the four of you feel like you learned from each other during this movie?
Pearl, go ahead.
Oh, yeah. I mean, obviously I learned just being on set. It was the first film I've ever been in, so it was an experience. Nocturnal on this set. Basically, all of our shoots were from like 5 p.m. to 5 a.m., so we all got to bond really well. Yeah, I don't know. I just feel like I learned a lot, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of the whole project. And yeah, it's cool.
I know we're to the audience in a second, but I wanted to ask you about the use of ratios, because the visual palette in this movie is so interesting. Can you speak a little bit about the choices you made there?
Well, tell a lot of stories on the small screen, and so when I thought about telling a movie on the big screen, I thought about the movie has to justify a theatrical experience. And then I always like to think about the things that people take for granted, right? And something we take for granted in a movie is you're going to use the whole screen and you're going to use the whole sound system and you're going to try to make it as big and loud as possible. But what I wanted to do was make a subjective film because it is a tough story. You know, people don't like stories about people who cheat on their spouses. They don't like that. So it's important for me that you not judge her, that you empathize with her by being in her shoes. So if your experience of her story is immersive and subjective, if she's in space and it's, you know, it's bigger than anything she's ever seen, and then she comes back to Earth and it's smaller, well, if we do that with the screen, then you are immersed in it. And hopefully it's done in a way that you might notice it at first, and obviously I'm a little bit playful with it in places, but it enhances the story, and ultimately you stop noticing the effect, you just feel the feeling.
I'll open it up. Does anybody have any questions? I'll start over here.
Hi guys. Great film. I love your stats. That great show. Incredible visual storytelling.
You're the guy who clapped.
I'm so happy to say that we now have a second role of yours about a philandering, booze-loving, charismatic professional.
Finally.
Natalie, I have to ask though, with all your experience in so many incredible science fiction fantasy films, did those characters help you both literally and figuratively ground his performance?
So the question was, with all your experience, Natalie, in science fiction and fantasy films, did those characters help you both literally and figuratively ground this performance?
Well, I think after doing so much work with green screen and with, you know, tennis balls with X marks on them, that you start really appreciating working with actors and loving and enjoying and like really just living in that. And it's such an honor and joy to work with actors like these. And I say actors like these, there are not many actors like these. These are very incredible people. So that's really lucky, and it's very grounding to be with incredible humans looking at you.
We did dangle
Be
you.
emotional. You did dangle.
We did dangle you a bit above the ground.
Yes. Which is, I mean, wearing a spacesuit is like one of the coolest experiences of ever.
I'm looking around here. I'll go forward and then back. You first.
Hi, my question's for Marley. Watching the movie, I saw a lot of similarities between Nina from Black Swan and Lucy, and they're both very strenuous psychological roles. Can you talk about, how you get into that mindset of playing that character?
So the question was in reference to similarities between this character and the character in Black Swan that you play, and they're both strenuous psychologically. And how do you get into that mindset?
It's I don't usually notice my own choices. It's usually other people who point out, like, oh, there's a link between these choices of roles to play. And I can definitely see a connection between people who perform at a very high level and kind of all of how strenuous that can be and lead to kind of an unraveling when you're striving for that level of success and perfection all the time. So yes, there definitely is a thread, and to get into it, it's really good writing and a lot of imagination, and it's also interesting talking to astronauts and hearing how hard it is emotionally and how they test them psychologically extensively before, because it is such a difficult thing to deal with coming back.
And then back there.
It's for all performers. On that topic, did you have any experience with NASA equipment of any sort of training, and if so, how did that impact your performances?
So the question was for all the astronauts. I mean, did you have any experience with equipment?
Again, 14 years since I was 5 years old.
Yeah.
None.
We did have one man.
Thank you.
Odds.
We paid for one whole man.
And I remember we would ask him questions, and I'm like, what does this mean or that? And sometimes he was like, I don't know what that means. And sometimes he was like, this means that. But it was really cool putting on I didn't get to put on a space, but I put on like a practice space thing, and I felt very powerful.
All I know is that my son is 6 and he got to come to set and push every single button and every switch, and it was the best day ever.
Appearing from the balcony.
You have an amazing cast, especially people on stage, but we also have the great actors. And you work with Nico, just as a director, what it was like to direct people and finding a cast like that.
So the question was about your amazing cast and what it's like to direct these people and finding this cast.
Yeah, it's, for me, it's an instinctual process of I'm looking for people who feel right in the roles, and some of them I've worked with before, and others, for me, there's no small parts. So like on Fargo, if the gas station clerk is good, it makes my whole episode for me. But with Ellen, who's obviously a legend, we had one of our nights where we were doing the kitchen scene, and I said, oh, when you leave, say, okay, here goes the hobo, and she's like, I'll say it, but you don't need it. And I said, just try it, and she said it every time, and I think it really worked. But she was in town for 5 days. I mean, we worked with Ellen for 5 days, and that's what happens on a film is you show up and you're like, okay, well, we only have this one day ever to shoot these scenes, and they feel big and important, but you just put your shoes on and get to work and do it. So yeah.
She's astonishing, and I was
Yeah.
totally, yes, please. She's one of the greatest players of acting. And like the sharpest actress I've ever worked with. No offense to anyone here, but like she never missed a line. She never missed a cue. She was just like so on it. And I said, I was like, what is your secret? How do you do this? And she said, I memorize a poem every day. And I was like, I love you so much more than I started out
She
with.
told me cocaine. Different movies, I guess. Huh?
I'm gonna go down here.
There's obviously a very evident theme of gender equality and gender acceptance, perception of gender prior to the wedding position. I was wondering if that was a theme that you were interested in going into it, or whether your class kind of brought that to the table. There's obviously a powerhouse of women all the time, which is amazing. I didn't know if that was something you thought about going into it, or if it was just kind of organically happened.
So the question was about the theme of gender equality and gender acceptance, and whether that was on the page going into it, or was something that was brought out more by the cast.
Well, it was definitely on the page, and it is part of the calibration of the story because, it's obviously a part of this story, the fictional story. You meet Natalie, and she's running around the track, and then here comes Jon, and he's like, relax, it's all easy, and he's like sleeping and drinking at lunch, and there's sort of no doubt that he gets to go back, but the movie is not about that, but to ignore that element of it, to be told that you're too emotional, to be viewed even with an unconscious bias. I mean, once it's there, we have to talk about it and we have to address it. And we did. We talked about it a lot and calibrated on the set, and then even in post about what, you don't want it to be a polemic, but you also want to address it. And I don't know, after we wrapped, Natalie sent me a link to that terrible, brilliant Saturday Night Live routine about the two female astronauts who went up into space, which is a true story, but they only had a spacesuit for one of them. You know, and it's like you were still facing that no one thought, well, there's two people going, so you know, it's part of the film, I think, and you know, I mean, it exists in the world, and it should be part of our stories.
We have time for a couple more back here.
Hi, I was just wondering, have either of you ever had that moment of nothing makes sense anymore, or an existential crisis in your own life?
So the question was, have any of you had the moment of nothing makes sense anymore?
Do you have to be somewhere? Because we can talk for a long time.
If you feel comfortable sharing.
Well, look, I think my hope with this is that, you know, I mean, storytelling is always about the creation of empathy, and the reality is everybody fails. Most of us fail in a less public way, but you know, it's the formation of our adult identity is that existential crisis, it's that sense of who am I and what does it all mean, and so, you know, I'm not going to get into specifics about it, but certainly, you know, I don't think any of us would be here today if we didn't ask those questions.
It usually hits me around the 5th day of a film festival, or joking, and I'm like, I bet I could fly. I really thought about it. That I could levitate and just fly. And then the guy from Fox is like, well, no, you have to answer more questions. Right. I'm not gonna fly.
On that note, we have time for one more. It's a very stunned audience right here. On the island.
Just more a comment than anything else, and congratulations on this film. I've been a space fanatic since I was a kid, and I think, you know, you get to know the technical side and documentaries around it, and all of a sudden, within a space of a year, you've got First Man, you've got Lucy in the Sky, you've got Proxima. You can talk about the family side, the personal side, and the demons that astronauts live with. And I think you did a brilliant thing. You rounded it all off. And congratulations. It really was a wonderful movie.
Thank you. I like that question.
Who's got one more question? Down here. So the question was about the use of the Mary Oliver poem at the end of the film.
No, it was in the script early on, and so I was really saddened to hear of her passing. And obviously, we had to get her permission to use it. But you know, it's such a beautiful sentiment and so clearly expressed. And you know, if the goal of the movie is finally to bring Lucy back to Earth and ground her, you know, it's such a earthbound, organic poem that still has a sense of, who are you to judge me? What are you going to do with your one wild and precious life? And so it felt like it allowed us to end on the right tone of, she's willing to say, I made a mistake, but is she willing to say, I'm sorry for everything? Yeah, not so much, so, you know.
Well, we have to wrap up, but I want to thank you guys so much for coming.